Okay, we look into our ancient Egypt series again. We're just looking at strange and rarely known facts of ancient Egypt. We're on lucky number 7 now. The last one I believe we did was mushrooms. If you remember that one, where it showed you all the mushrooms and symbology that they had around in a few temples and some of the column tops and things like that. And let's see, what was the one before that? I start to lose them over time. I remembered it just a moment ago before I started this and the last two that we had. But yeah, so let's look into this. This one's more about just the Nile and kind of a straightforward kind of thing, I guess you'd say, and show some things known about it here. Now, the Delta region down here is what's known as Lower Egypt. Even though up on a map it looks that way, it comes up through here, through the cataracts, zigzags real hard and comes up, and then you have the Blue Nile and what's known as the White Nile that comes up out of here. They meet and run down through, and most people don't know that it even has more than one tributary in a lot of cases. But so it's actually named after a Greek word known as Nilos, and it's a kind of a waterborne idea. And its original name, though, was a little bit different. Um, the Egyptians called the Nile that they lived off of and their land that was there Or, or Ar. Now you hear that they called it Kemet, but they called the fertile soil area Kemet, so it's almost like saying farmland or black soil, but it wasn't pointing out the entire Nile that they lived up and down. They called that Ar or Or, and Or is strange. Here we have Ur, that's from the Sumerians, and we have Ar from over here, and they both signify gold in some way. And if we thought about the way that people smelted ore to make metal, then we would see that there's a slight variation on this Proto-Indo-European languages that's run through here. And it's an AEIOU situation on a similar word that means the same thing. Or means the same as AUR, or, which means the sun or golden, right? And then Ur of the Sumerians, who have a lot of ooh going on in their words if you listen to their dialects and stuff going on. So it's a slight change, but then because they live on this river and they call themselves or they call the river Or, these are Aryans, golden people. And so that's what their original name was. People say they're called the Egyptians. Well, that again was named by the Greeks. Just like Africa itself is named after a Greek. The Greeks named a lot of people. They tell you too that the Medes at one time were actually named Aryans, and that Media had come from Athens, and at that time they changed their name, so that's how they got their name Media, or the Medians. And the same had also happened to Persia whenever Persis had came. It's also where we get the idea of persistence too. That word comes from that same concept, and they were kind of persistent, I guess, if you look at it there. And that's found in other words too, like Percival, that you find in the Arthurian legends. And of course we'll do one of the things on Arthurian legends and all the stories of the Arthurian legends and things here at a different time. I'll have to do it coming up. Hopefully I'll have some here coming up, maybe perhaps in before Thanksgiving of this year, if I can get it lined up in. That requires a whole nother research back into it again to line it all up and put it all together, and it'd have to be quite some series to be able to do so. But just to contain part of it, I'll show you something.
Have to be ratified at a special bi-weekly meeting. Yes, I see. By a civil majority in the case of purely internal affairs.
Be quiet.
So by a 2/3 majority in the case of more
Be
major.
quiet. I order you to be quiet.
Y'all remember this? You ever seen Monty Python, The Holy Grail before? I probably can't show this in real time and straight up, but it's funny. This is the part where he tells you that he's their king and that he's Arthur, and how he gets his name.
What do you think he is? How did he become king then?
The Lady of the Lake. Her arm clad in the purest shimmering samite, held aloft Excalibur from the bosom of the water. Sing, that is why I'm your king. This
And famous line from the movie and stuff. But also he mentioned samite there. If you did, that's an ancient and metal that people knew about. That I'll have to go into at a different time and things. And
strange women lying in ponds distributing swords is no basis for a system of government. Supreme executive power derives from a mandate from the masses, not from some farcical aquatic ceremony. Be quiet. Now we see the violence inherent in the system.
So yeah, so a lot of people don't know that the Egyptians called the River Nile the R, and therefore they're Aryans or Aryans, whichever way you want to look at it, Orions. So it's where the connection comes from, and they've made everything connect to it. And Orion the hunter, and then you see them in that symbolism and in that pose whenever they're smiting somebody, and whenever they do, they're standing in that pose of Orion. So you get Orion, Arian, Urian. You later find people called the Hurrians. We'll get to that in another video, though. But yeah, kind of interesting that that's where the name comes from, and most people don't actually know it. And it is the longest river in the world. People say the Amazon and this, that, and the other. No, it's the longest river in the world by far, and without necessarily even attachment onto them. And it flows from the south to the north, so people don't usually think of that. And so southern Egypt is upper in the Egypt, and so the valley situation is up there. Northern Egypt is considered lower Egypt, or the delta, right? So that's what I was talking about before, where up here is the north, that's northern, but that's lower, and this is upper, because this is higher land and lower land that goes down here. There's mountains that all come up from here, and that's where it actually starts from. But believe it or not, in the ancient times, they actually thought once it hit up here in Sudan, they didn't know. They actually thought it hooked over here and went right through the desert and all the way over here to the Atlas Mountains. And you can look at Herodotus' maps from back then, and that's where they thought it came from. That's where they thought they had come from, somehow, some water thing, and they had forgotten it in somehow. But I'm about to show you where it actually comes from, Sumerians. And one of the earliest culture there is known as the Badarians. Well, Bad means city in German. Germans have a lot to do with the research to go in here. So you find Badarians, and that's city-dwelling Aryans. You find before that they were living off that valley area there, and then they would have just been called Aryans. So that's another case where you'll see that name show up in ancient times. All attached is to the Proto-Indo-Europeans that ran all across, or Europe, through Asia, all the way into the edge of China, down to India, and back across, and through the Middle East at one time. Of people that are not quite what you see in most of those areas today, but there are still some remnants of such. Now, Egypt was known as the gift of the Nile. That's what it was definitely called. And so that was due to its flood inundations I was talking about before, which swelled out, and it did so between June and October. And so that was their flood time. Everybody think it would happen during the spring, but no, it really happened a little bit later. It almost took some time to get going, and the mountains up there in Ethiopia will actually get some snow on them and stuff, and they seem to have a late rainy season that has attachments to do with monsoons that happen out here in the Indian Ocean. Yeah, so it's a whole correlation there. And the planting and harvest time run from February to June, and so it was spring as it was, but that's harvest time instead of planting time. So you'd think it's almost ass backwards, isn't it, from what we think of? And these people manipulated the Nile in quite a few ways. They made aqueducts, they did things off of it and ran irrigation, and so when it flooded, it would actually flood out plains for them and take some of the brunt off of certain areas, but also flood out whole alluvial plains they all had ready to go that they could utilize. But they could only utilize a lot of those when it flooded, and in times of drought they used other methods, like what you see here. This is called a shadaf, and or Shadoof, whichever way you want to pronounce it. And basically, it's a bucket on a ladle with a rocker arm in the back of it, and there's a weight back there that's about as much as this would be when it's full. So it almost weighs nothing, and it's heavy on the end like a fishing reel. And you pop it down in the water, pull it up, and then it's about even Steven to where you can just grab this and throw it. And if you'll look, there's trough after trough after trough after trough going up the hill here out of the Nile. And basically, they do this in a succession, and then it spills out into an irrigation plane that they've got running. And there's signs that a lot of these had like a little lock system to them, to where they would do it and fill all up the top part and then let it loose, and it would all flood down into the field as they kept trying to push water into it for a while and get in that one done. And then they would work on different fields at different times, and they had people kind of keeping up with where they needed to go to bring water. And when it got into drought times, this is the only way that they actually got water to there. So it became a total different adventure. And that's where papyrus comes from, and the Sea of Reeds that you hear about, and in the Bible where it says the Red Sea, it's really the Sea of Reeds, and it swells out, and that whole floodplain down there turns into a swamp area at certain times of the year. And they were lucky whenever they went through it, the Hyksos, whenever they expelled out of there, that they caught it in just the right time and were able to make it through, kind of like they had indicated. And papyrus is what makes paper, but also it's shown in a lot of their equipment and stuff. And then the reeds that make up papyrus are what makes up the ancient reed boats, which later turns into wood and so on. But the different types of boats that you see, and of course these all go back to the Sumerian boats, which had that same tipped brow and same tipped bottom all through them. And shown into a video here recently where they have found ancient bitumen, which has old elder reeds in it, date to a few thousand years BC, and they have barnacles all over them. And the only way you get barnacles is to keep them in water long period of time to let that all grow and happen, right? Like what happens on ships and so on. And it takes a long time for it to happen, and you have to keep them sitting in salt water. Yeah, and it doesn't happen in the docks necessarily so much, but it can. And you have to kind of get, this shows you that they had people not just there, but way off before then in these boats. And I'm about to show a video where it shows connections of ancient cave drawings or the wall art that's in between the Red Sea and the Nile. And it shows Sumerian attachments to that. Should just go into it right here, but this one's got its own thing going on, and I think we've already done the reveal already somewhat. But Egypt had 5 natural barriers which kept them pretty much protected from other things. They're really pretty much anything south of them, and you get to a certain point of there, and there's the Ethiopian mountains that are there in Ethiopia. And we've found out recently that that wasn't the only place that the Greeks called Ethiopia either. They called a bunch of places, and over in India and all around, and even up in the northern climes, they had places they called Ethiopia. So it really wasn't necessarily the people that were there or that are there in that place, or we call Ethiopia today. And Ethiopia really just means sunburnt faces, or burnt face, as they say. And so this is not really referring to black people as much as it is referring to people that are apparently real close to the equator down here, not too much farther, and you find it. And in fact, there you actually are pretty much at it. Ecuador, pretty much equal to this and stuff. So, where this is parallel to on the earth, if you look at it, is kind of like South Florida and South Texas is straight across. It's really not that. In fact, the Egyptian climate is a whole lot cooler than it is in Texas. I've compared the two quite a bit, and here we are at 104 here, and there they are at 84 there, and night times get cool there quite a bit, and here we'd still be in the 90s sometimes in this Texas swelter. But that's a different entity altogether. But you can see all these little feedlings that all feed into it here. I'm sorry the picture's kind of small. If you're looking at it on a phone, you're kind of in trouble. But those 5 natural barriers that they have, one, they have the Red Sea on the east. And again, I'm going to show you where there's only a couple of places they can make it through here, and people have found those. And they talk about the ancient fishermen that all lived down here, right, in all the ancient Egyptian stuff. So they found this settlement and this settlement here that's there. And if you try to go there to here, there's only a couple of ways kind of through. It's quite some rugged little terrain all cutting through there. And in the process, you run through this, and it shows them actually dragging these boats and doing these things that later you see in Egyptian art, where they're not even in water and they're dragging these boats around with these people on it and these other things, and it's a symbolic situation that goes back to that. And so then they also had the desert to the west, which they call Deseret, and it's Semitic again. So all you got to do is take the H out of the center of it, and it becomes Deseret, and that's where we get desert from. And so that's neat, kind of learn that. And the Mediterranean Sea to the north blocks anybody unless they're sea travelers. In fact, the Red Sea on that side over here does too, to the east, but you'd have to be a sea traveler to get there, and then it's quite the adventure to get through. And everybody over here knows how to get through and where you're going to be coming if you do, and they've got little outposts and things, and people will let you know, one if by land, two if by sea, things like that. So it's not really happening so much. Egypt didn't really get invaded because of these facts too much. It's got the Ethiopian mountains up top and stuff, and all the way through the Horn of Africa there was always Caucasians and stuff. If you look up the definition of Caucasian, it'll show you that's primordial times, not what's going on now. Things have all changed from the Bantu expansions, and a lot of things happen. And as this whole area turned into a desert, these people left and went to, greener pastures, as to say. But then also the river cataracts that they have that run up and down the Nile make it, some people don't realize that this is not just one simple little boat ride. This is hundreds and hundreds of miles running down this thing. But then there's cataracts run at all these little points that you can see on here. And each one of those is pretty much a waterfall, rapids, and or almost a Niagara Falls situation, depending on which one we're looking at. And so you can see it here on a map, maybe, where it shows you the first cataract at Aswan Dam, where that's at now, and the Tashka Lakes and Lake Nassar that's right there, and the second cataract, and so on. And this is where we almost lost the ancient temples that are there, and the Fayum, and they've moved those now and set them up. And so it shows you that it's capable of moving these things in modern time, but they really had to cut a lot of them into pieces, and in old times they didn't apparently cut them ever into pieces. So kind of neat still showing about that. But then they have the second cataract. Way up here you get a wiggle bend, and there's another cataract right after that. The fourth cataract comes after the whole arc in it, and the fifth up out of here. And so they had come and gotten this area a whole lot of times, and then in Senuseret the Thirds, they had taken it all the way up to here, and this is where Icon and the trading area was, and where it tells you in Senuseret's tablet that they can't pass. Here, I can show that to you. Here, it's the Simne Stela of Senuseret II, and it tells you zoom in on it here, from year 8 of his rule. Tells you the southern boundary made in the year 8 under the majesty of the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Kekur, is given life forever and ever, in order to prevent that any Negro should pass and cross it, by water or by land, with a ship or any herds of the Negroes, except our Negroes shall come to trading in Icon. This with a commission. Every good thing shall be done with them, but without allowing a ship of the Negroes to pass Heh, going downstream forever. And Heh is really right up there where we were looking at. And the Icon trading station was just more south of that, I guess you'd say, and let them have more of that as a spot. So right up in here, and look here, it shows pretty well on there, at least it does to me. Let me try to zoom this in a few more notches here, like it was originally, like right in there. That shows a whole lot better, doesn't it? I'm sorry. So if you look, this looks like a little mini Niagara Falls. And this is not even the super flood season. This is when it's kind of going on. And this is all kind of stopped now because they have that Aswan Dam and it blocks it up. And so there's not a big purge that happens at one time. And so they have to manually irrigate pretty much always, but it's always kept at a certain level kind of thing. So kind of helps out. And it still does lift whenever they go through it, but a foot or two. It never inundates and ruins the land. So it's let people kind of move in and do things like that. And so I guess the ancient Egyptians would think that the gift of the Nile is no more, how it doesn't ever just throw up like it used to all over and change and refertilize the whole land anymore. Well, we don't necessarily need that so much anymore, and they almost need the land to live and things, and to be closer than a few miles away from the Nile, just in case it's going to burp that one every few years and so on. And then if we go through a few years of drought, you're not even really using those fields anymore. You're having to supplement and bring it down to a smaller space. So it kind of changes everything at that point too. So that modern manipulation though that they've done, they've built this dam way back here at the Aswan Dam system, and here it shows you here. And you can see the blue area, and the blue area still is a fertile area, and it's still black soil, and it still grows like crazy. But it used to get almost twice this wide in certain areas where it would burp out, and from about here down to the delta, it would get 3 times this wide and just swamp the whole delta sometimes, and inundate the entire area badly. You know, if it had a good rain season, you know, that comes in. So it's our late season, though. It really wasn't spring either. So hopefully we've learned a couple of things out of this. And yeah, this river that runs there, and the longest river in the world, used to be called the R River, the Ari or R River. And its god was Happy. Happy is a blue-colored god, and you know, it's kind of funny they use that Happy as his name there because it made the people very happy whenever it happened. You can imagine they used to do these ceremonies when they knew it was coming, and they would do a festival coming into it, a whole rites, rituals, and things like that that I don't want to get into. It'll take another 20 minutes to go through it, and you know me. But in that, they would take these little dolls, these little effigy dolls, little shabtis and stuff, and do this little thing and put them out there. Kids have